Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly, and my co host for today's show is Janet Corsi. And the topic of the show is writing an autobiography and sensuality. And our guest for today's show is Bernard Foong. Bernard Foong was born into a Chinese family of privilege in Malaysia, and he's the third son who early on showed an interest in ballet and fashion. You are a fashion designer, I believe. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yes.
Okay. He and his father, a very successful businessman, did not really have a good relationship. In fact, he was not much of a father or a husband. Fong was sent to a boarding school in England after he was caught having a sexual rendezvous with another boy. What his father did not know was that at school, he would be inducted into the Enlightened Royal Oracle Society, or EROS, and it was there that he learned sensuality and sexuality. The members are trained to be apprentices in harems in the Arab Emirates. And we're going to talk about harems in a minute because we talked about this before we went on the air earlier today. And it's an interesting story. He has to explain what a harem really can be. What you will read in Bernard's story is a very personal view of the Arab world and the treatment of homosexuals under Muslim law. Bernard had always believed in such secret societies like the EROS, were fabrications of vivid imaginations. However, his experience and undoubtedly asserts that the skin trade is alive and well. In addition, and he's going to explain more about that because there's a lot to this that we're saying that isn't exactly what you think. Okay, and so he learned there are a few graphic scenes of sex that might have some readers winch. The series of 5 books gives us a look at cultures and subcultures that we never knew existed, as well as a different way of looking at the Middle East. For years, Bernard hid from his parents how he got to England and the Arab Emirates. The trip came under the auspice of a student exchange scholarship program by which Foong was sent to a private school somewhere on the Arabian Peninsula. From there, he was taken to a secret location where he met other scholarship recipients. He was introduced to the rules and regulations under which he was to live and informed that they were never to be violated. He in turn was granted rich rewards, and he became a player in a game of the rich and powerful that took place in secret and behind closed doors. So the first thing I want to ask you to, well, first of all, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly, and my co-host is Janet Corsi. Our guest is Bernard Foong, and the topic of the show is writing an autobiography and sensuality. We have never really talked about sensuality on the show.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
This would be interesting.
Sounds very intriguing,
Yeah.
actually.
All right, so the first question for you, Bernard, is what was life like for you before you leaving for Europe? What was your home life like as a child?
Well, I had a wonderful relationship with my mother. She was always very supportive of what I do. Um, ever since I could remember, she doted over me because she already had 2 sons before I came along. And when I was born, her dream was to have a baby girl.
Sure.
And I came along, and I basically was treated like a princess because the year before I was born, she went on the Queen Mary tour because she and my father had a difficult relationship. My father, who is now passed on, was a womanizer. So she decided she wanted to get a divorce, but my dad wouldn't grant her one at that time. You know, both parties have to agree. If one doesn't, then they can't divorce. And so mother took the Queen Mary and went on a 6-month tour. And every port that she stopped at, she bought a doll, for her next child. Which she wanted a girl,
Right?
And she bought girls' clothes as well, baby girls' clothes. She bought it to tell, she says to give it to her friends and to my relatives. We have a big family, so we have a lot of female relatives, but really she wanted to keep those dresses for the baby girl.
Right.
And so when I came along, And also when she was on the Queen Mary, she met a wonderful English gentleman who was then the CFO of Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation in Hong Kong, who spoke perfect Mandarin. So they both got on very well on the cruise, and Uncle James became my surrogate father when I was sent to boarding school in England. He was kind of my guardian there,
Uh-huh.
and I wish that Uncle James was my dad instead of my real dad.
Right, right.
My relationship with my dad was not a happy one because he wanted his sons to be very butch he-man, and I'm not. And I like all the things that are very artistic, especially fashion design, theater, anything that does that has to do with costuming. I'm interested in, and art. And so mother kind of supported me on that. She sent me to art classes. She sent me to ballet classes, all the things that I love to do. So my relationship with my mom was very, very close. And of course, when I was born, the first thing I remember was that my room was like a fairy tale princess, room
Right.
with dolls around me, and she had the like the a mural. I think it was a mural on the wall of Liechtenstein Castle that she had painted when she was on tour. During her tour, her visit to Germany.
Yeah, I've been there.
And yeah, and that was fabulous. I just loved my playroom, and um, I had a lot of female cousins as well who came to visit my mom, and we would play with the dolls. Sometimes we would dress up. I remember there were times when when Pinky and I went to my mom's dressing room and just kind of stole her cheongsams to wear, just for the kick of it.
Right.
And
Dress up.
and her high heel shoes and all. So, but it didn't make me gay. It simply was was fun to do, at that age. This was like when I was about maybe 6 years old or 7 years old. Um, and but anyway, Dad didn't want me to do ballet. He didn't want me to do. He would send me to classes that are kind of
Like
macho
woodworking,
related.
woodworking,
Yeah.
mechanics, like
And judo classes,
Yeah.
karate classes, and I end up, falling in love or falling for the instructor.
Yeah.
And then he would drag me out from the class 2 weeks later, knowing what happened. So that was not a good time. And then in school, I was bullied relentlessly by the older boys. They would call me sissies and names that I wouldn't mention. But then once I went to the boarding school, it was Uncle James who recommended my mother to send me to this exclusive boarding school, because Uncle James knew that I would fit in very well um, in that school, and the bullying stopped completely because once I entered, I call it Daltonbury Hall in my books. Daltonbury Hall allocated a big brother. It's an all-boys school, and the 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 boys are all the freshmen are all allocated a big brother who would be with them 24 hours of the day. So we room with them as well. And they would basically act as our chaperone and our bodyguard to make sure that we are in a safe environment. And they are ex-students from the school. So they give back a year of their time to groom a freshman or a junior, to eventually become a big brother themselves.
Now, I want to interject just a minute here. It's important for people to understand. You've written 5 books based on your life story, and I believe these are under contract to Sony to be made into a movie. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask before we move forward, what did your father do for business?
My father was an entrepreneur. He had a hand in a lot of different things. He owned a nightclub. He was in the real estate business. He also owned a snack bar, and he owned a sports stadium. That's why he wanted all his boys to be like this.
So he was very successful.
Oh yeah, he was.
All right. Now we're going to go back to the school. I just wanted to interject there because people need to understand this story is really interesting, and it is a series of 5 books. And when you were at this school, you had your big brother. Okay.
Yeah.
Your assigned big brother. At what point did it change to where you were telling me earlier where each year there was like 150 students, I believe you told me, in the school, and each year 5 boys were chosen. Can you explain that situation?
We were never told that we were under observation once we go into the school. Now, they don't observe every boy. I mean, the big brothers, basically, the school authorities knows which boy has the potential to be selected into the EROS program, which is a special fraternity where if we get selected, the 5 get selected, and they go on a student exchange program to the Middle East. So in this, when I went into the school, my big brother was basically grooming me step by step to see if I have the potential to enter the EROS, and they would put us in situations, both sensual and sexual situations, to see if we would freak out or if we would run the other direction. Well, it so happened that I didn't. So I was shortlisted. I was one of the 8 that year to be shortlisted to go into that program. And during the final, inverted commas, examination or test, 3 of the boys left when we were having a sort of orgy, and they freaked out. They couldn't handle it, so they left, and that left the 5 boys that was in the room, but we didn't know that it was a test. It was just an enjoyable situation to me. It was, and so then our headmaster called us in 3 days later and told us that we have been selected into the special program, and that if you agree to go in and take the challenge, then you will be rewarded handsomely, not just financially, but also in your life experience.
Like education?
Yeah, when I say education, it's not just the regular schooling education, but education in life.
Yeah.
Like sensuality and sexuality and
the art of flirtation, the art of grooming, the art of how to conduct yourself, how to present yourself, how to be a good listener. Things that the schools don't teach you
Well, you
Right.
had
to be.
mentioned to me as well that this was sort of like being a geisha, that you were
Yes,
being groomed very much like you would be to be a geisha
or a courtesan.
or a
You know.
courtesan. Yeah.
Well, the I think nowadays the word geisha or courtesan equals prostitution. In the old days, it's not like that
Right.
because courtesans and geishas are groomed to be good listeners to your patriarchs who would come and be a patron, and you become their entourage when they travel. You're part of their family in a way.
Mhm.
So a harem is like that. It's not a prostitution ring where you just go in and have sex with whoever is
Right.
is in the household. It's not like that. It's part of being um, a, um, a
Well, you're there. Basically, you're there. First of all, you worked with the elite of society, with the upper
right.
1% of society. So
Yes.
you traveled on yachts. You traveled the most expensive yachts in the world
Yes,
with
and
this
stay
entourage.
at the best hotels, the best lodgings. So it's a very well, to some it might be a glamorous lifestyle, but there's also a lot of minefields where you have to be careful of n- not being um, not to this not to you have to be able to maneuver through that uh,
Right.
difficult
And
situations.
part of that is you keep secrets. You don't tell
Yes,
someone's right. That was the number one thing, is that you had to be able to be trusted in that society.
Yeah.
yeah,
And you couldn't be
and
naive to the lifestyle.
right.
Yeah.
That's why they select the 5 boys. It's not just for the boys. There are other schools that send their recruits, to be. Uh, there's another school that we went to after we have been selected. I call it the Barigi School, which is an oasis school. So the 5 of us, after we have been selected, went to this more exclusive school in the Middle East, which is outside of Dubai, um, and it's in an oasis. It used to be an old fort, uh, and they converted that into a school. It's all walled in, and on one side it's the girls section, and the other side is the boys section. There's a wall that divides the two, because in the Arab world, the females and the males are segregated, very distinctively.
Mhm.
So we cannot have any uh, kind of official contact with them unless it's an official thing,
An event.
within the school. Yeah,
Yeah.
an event or a tutorial or some kind of um, the, a practical lesson or something. You know,
Yeah.
so it's very organized. It's not like just they plug you in and throw you in deep water. It's not
Well,
like that.
and the other thing is that in addition to you being an entourage to whomever you were with at the time, whether it be a sheik or some other protege from Europe or wherever, you had your own entourage. You had a valet with you. You had your big brother with you.
Yes, yes.
So in
Every
an
boy,
odd way, you had your own entourage.
yeah, in every boy, and I call them recruits. Every recruit have either a big sister or a big brother. Um, the boys call them valets, call their big brothers valet. The girls call them big sister. because they are there to make sure that you are safe, that you are not abused by or taken advantage by your patriarchs or the members of the household, because they themselves have been through the program, and they are also groomed as big brothers and chaperones to make sure that their charge is safe. And if we don't want to do anything that we don't want to, then there's certain ways that we can politely refuse the offer or the proposal, And the proposals are not done face to face. There's always, they're servants, but we call them abdis. Abdis are young, maybe teenage servants that works in the household, and they would deliver messages to us. And in turn, in reply, we give the message to the abdi, and the abdi then gives it to our patriarchs. So there is no direct connection. If a patriarch wants to beg you or something, then he would send the abdi with the message and says, "Would you meet me at certain time?" And if you say no, you don't feel like it, you can always respond and give the message to the abdi to deliver to your patriarch. And
that would eliminate confrontation.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the very. It's a balance,
Yeah, it keeps it civil.
And of course there are of course some patriarchs that are not civil and would refuse what our decision are. But if they do anything that is out of the rules, the era's rules, then they are blacklisted from the society, and then they would not be welcome back into the
well, the patriarchs of the society who basically recruited you guys, they knew the rules, right? They know the rules before you ever become part of it. So if they're breaking the rules, they know they're breaking the rules.
Oh yes, yes, definitely. Because eros, Daltonbury Hall is heavily funded by Arab oil money at that time. I don't know about now, but at that time it was heavily funded, and 90% of the boys that goes into Daltonbury Hall are foreign students. There's only a small percentage that comes from England or from Scotland or the nearby, county. And almost all the boys that goes into that school comes from wealthy families. Because the fees are very expensive. The school fees are very expensive, and they are very selective of who goes into that school.
How do they recruit? What's the criteria for a recruit?
We were being observed for about 9 months. Like I said, I didn't know I was being observed. My big brother, I knew I'm gay since I was about 9 years old. And when I went into the school, my big brother was a bisexual gentleman who was at that time maybe 5 years older than me. He was about 18 or 19 years old, but he has gone through the program. So I call him Nicky. I fell in love with Nicky because he was the nicest person I knew at that time,
Yeah.
who was attentive, and he listened to my problems, what I have to say, and he would console me when I'm not happy. Because when you're so far away from your family, you always, especially for younger boys, or younger person, they feel homesick.
Oh yeah.
So they are there to help us get through that period. And I was very attracted to Nikki, and several times at night, when I was not unhappy, I would sleep with Nikki on the same bed. But Nikki never touched me. Uh, but it was me who touched Nikki.
Yeah.
Because they don't they
It's not part of their curriculum.
yeah, it's not part of the curriculum. Unless the younger person takes the first initiated, then they would, start to tell us, they don't tell us directly that we are groomed for bigger things. They just say that, through after your schooling, you would be going to do bigger things than what you're doing now. So, so they would test us in this kind of way to see whether we are curious or whether we just let it go, that. And then if we are curious and we want to find out more, like I am, then I would pester him to tell me more. But then he still wouldn't tell me more. He would then set up, like, the first time we had a sexual relationship was when we were out horse riding. Because I was telling you, my father would put me in all these karate classes, judo classes, and I hated it because he forced me to do it.
Right.
But Nikki encouraged me to do it, to go on horseback riding, to go play polo, to do swimming,
To make it fun.
To make it fun. It's not like I'm forced to go and do the thing. So when we went out horse riding, we stopped by in a forest near, several miles from the school. And then, one thing led to another. I started kissing Nikki, and then, things kind of snowballed that way. And then I was introduced to another big brother who was an avid rower, whom I call Andy, who turned out eventually to become my valet and my lover for 4 years while I was at the different households. So that's how we get initiated. It's not a direct.
How long were you with this entourage, a school, or whatever you want to call it?
4 years.
Okay. And then, so that was 4 years.
Each household is 3 years, not 3 months.
Okay.
So I was in 6 different households, and then I spent 1 year grooming a freshman, and I went with the freshman to his first household, and that was 3 months. So altogether, the entire program was about 4 years, 4.5 years.
So then they consider you too old at that point?
Yes.
Interesting. All right.
So intricate. I mean, there's just so many different things that weave into one another. Who funded this?
Yes, who's the one who created this?
Where did it start? Yeah.
Well, that I'm not sure, but I knew that the funding comes from the Arab world, and that Dalton Berry Hall was very heavily funded by Arab money. And obviously the school is affiliated, with the elite, within the Middle Eastern aristocratic crowd. So um, um,
there you have it.
that's yeah, right. That's about all I know about the funding.
Now,
to
part
this
of what your
program.
job was when you were recruited is it wasn't all sexual. A lot of times it was just listening. It was kind of
Right.
like you said, it's very much like a geisha. People have a misinterpretation of what that whole
Yeah.
lifestyle is about. It's there, you're there as a companion to have someone to talk to because they
Yes.
can't talk to a family member or a business person. They needed someone who's on their team but from the outside, but they could confide in, know they wouldn't share that
Right.
information with anyone else.
You will read in the third book called Debauchery that I became the confidant of my patriarch. Um, he was a very reserved man, an Arab man, um, and um, he's I think he's deceased now. He's passed on, but at that time, um, he he was one of the children of the emir of Shajar. Shajar is a small country which is part of the Arab Emirates. Now Shajar is a very cosmopolitan place, and I knew in later years he became the emir of Shajar, and he got married. At that time he was already married, but being married doesn't mean that they have sex with just the women.
Right.
Uh, they they have 4 wives, and they also have concubines, and that's where the female harem comes in. And then there is male harems, and they can, again, the female harems are not what you think harems are. They are places where you where you entertain your patriarchs. You're groomed to listen to them. If they call you in one evening or in the day or whatever, and they have problems, they don't know how to express to somebody else, they will talk to you, and you have to know how to respond to what they're trying to tell you, without divulging it to the whole world. That's the whole
Right.
point of being a geisha or a courtesan, is to be a good listener, and to whatever they tell you stays with you. It doesn't go out.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I wanted to do was talk about the similarities between history when it comes to Greek lifestyles. Even the Romans were known to have young men in battle that would fornicate with the soldiers. I wanted to talk a little bit about that because you were in countries where homosexuality wasn't really permitted and actually could be put to death for it. So how
Yes.
did that play out in what you were doing?
Well, I presume we all know that the elite has a different set of rules than the common folks.
Yeah.
So the elite lives a separate lifestyle, completely different than to what the regular people does. So what you do in private in the elite household, and half the time our patriarchs are not in their country. They are highly educated. Like all my first patriarch was educated in Cambridge University, and he would go to Paris and have an apartment there. They travel all over the world. They don't just stay in their country. And like in my third book, with I can't remember what I called him, but
I have that happen.
the 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 emir I was telling you of Sajar, well, he was in love with another prince, you know, from my second household, but they couldn't do it openly. So he was he was gay, but he can't express it. So they have to marry to use that
Right.
as
A
a
front.
front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a front for what they do behind the scene.
Right.
So not that they don't love their wives get whatever they want.
Right.
They get the best jewelry, they get the best clothes, you know, that
Travel,
money can
cars.
buy. Exactly. But when it comes to love, they also have their own little secrets.
Uh-huh.
That's where the heterosexual harem boys would do.
Uh-huh.
Oh, so there was another harem of boys
No,
just for the
no,
wives?
no.
No?
It's the same harem that
Oh,
we are in. There are boys that are gay, bisexual, and heterosexual.
okay.
So the school knows our sexual preferences because when we go through the initiation program or the selection program, they have a record of what our preferences are.
Uh-huh.
They already know. So that goes to the household, to the school, to the patriarch's household, and that is kept in secret. And if the females, say one of the harem concubines or one of the wives is not getting, you know, the sexual things from the husband, then she has
A
She has the
friend.
in secret,
ability, yeah, to
is the
tap
ability
into
to
that
fall.
harem.
Yes, but it has to be done hush hush. It cannot be, you know, openly announced.
Okay.
Right, because then she would be cheating on her husband, and that's absolutely forbidden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You must
but
be
everybody,
highly
but
educated, though, in order to pull off all of this. You must then be continually getting educated in all things.
yes, that's why our big brothers are there to constantly remind us that, you know, you have to be vigilant of what you're doing.
Uh-huh.
And they will advise us on what to do in difficult situations. So it's not like it is a glamorous world, but it's also not a glamorous world when it comes to all the secrets that you have to be vigilant about.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That we can't tell our parents, you know, our parents know where we are. They know I'm in Sajar, or they know I'm in Paris, or they know I'm in London, but they don't know what I do there.
Right. Right.
All they knew is I'm on a student exchange program.
Okay, so did your parents ever find out?
No,
No?
because there was no need to tell my father. First of all, I didn't particularly need to, you know, announce my, you know, what I do in the section in the student exchange program.
Right.
They don't ask, so I don't tell.
Okay.
And my mother doesn't. As long as I'm happy, you know, in what I'm doing, she's happy. So it doesn't matter to her, you
So
know.
are your parents, I know your father has passed away. Is your mother still alive?
No, my mother has also passed. That's why I'm writing my books, because
Okay, that's what I was going to ask.
Uh-huh.
So when you started these after they both passed away?
oh, many years after
Okay.
I wrote these books 45 years after my experience.
Okay.
I'm
Uh-huh.
I'm older than you think I am.
Now, how about your
Uh,
brothers? How did your brothers receive this?
They don't mind. They are highly educated. They
Uh-huh.
have their own lives. They are married. They have their own families, you know.
Uh-huh.
And besides, this happened 45, 50 years ago, you
Mm-hmm.
know. I mean, I had a wonderful education, so there's nothing to complain about.
Right.
Right.
And it was by choice. This wasn't something
It
you were
was by
forced into.
exactly.
And I think when it comes to the sex trade, because that's really part of what we're talking about, it's an
Right.
automatic given that people are recruited and you hear stories of being held hostage. And none of that happened with you. This was
No.
a lifestyle choice.
Yes.
And it wasn't necessarily about the sexuality only. It was about the people you encountered, like your big brother.
Yes.
You know, you had the relationship with the one for 4 years. So it was
Yeah.
And
much
it's
more
about
detailed.
and it's about learning about life, because everybody have a story to tell, and especially even the rich and the elite, they might look very glamorous on the facade, but behind the facade they might be very sad,
Right.
or
Right.
they might be very unhappy, and we are there as a support group to help them, come to terms with themselves.
Well, it would be
know?
sad for the ones that you're talking about that would marry but knew in real life they were gay, and yet they can't live that life because in the country that they're actually maybe part of a ruler of, they can't
Right.
expose that because of their own rules about homosexuality. So it would
That's
have to
why
be a very lonely life for them.
that's why most of them have second or third homes away from the Middle East. They either have homes in Europe or homes in maybe America. I don't, probably.
Yeah.
And when they're away from their own country, nobody cares what they do.
I
It's
have
like
I have a
they are
friend who was
free.
who was from Lebanon, and he would tell me these stories 20 years ago. I helped him write a book. And he would tell me these stories of exactly what you're telling me. And he would often say how oftentimes some of these people would go to Kuwait, or from Kuwait they would go to, like you said, London or Paris. And it was completely different. Even though the rules were here in this country this way, once they left that country, it was whatever they
Yeah,
wanted.
exactly. Yeah, they're a whole different person once they leave, the
Yeah.
Middle East. But when they're back in the Middle East, they have to be prim and proper and have to behave. That's why in my fifth book, my patriarch hated being, uh, back home where he was. He was a professional athlete, and he goes around the world, playing polo. And so when he's away, he's happier than ever.
Yeah.
He would be in Buenos Aires dancing away, doing the tango and having a fling with women and men,
Mm-hmm.
and then but then when he's back with his family, even the sister who was at that time was very rebellious. She hated the kind of restrictions that they have um, on women, and she was rebelling desperately. And they put her on a. She went on a hunger strike, and they force fed her. Eventually, the brother, which is my patriarch, she managed to get the brother to take her out to London, to England, and then when she was there, she married an Englishman.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. It
And
was her
never ran
escape.
back. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
the escape route. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's
Well,
a
it's
very, yeah,
they're in a mold when they're at home, and they can't deviate from that mold no matter what. But
hmm
once they leave, it's like they've just been dumped out of that
right,
Jello mold, so now they can just spread out
So don't you
right.
and
think through
enjoy
all
life.
everything that we're talking about, it's really a self-examination of who we are as human beings.
Yep.
And
Yes,
isn't it sad that we create all these rules many times, and I'm not slamming religion, but many times it's for religious beliefs,
hmm
and all that does, you
it's not just religious; it's also political as
yeah,
well,
okay,
Yeah.
because um, I think every country has double standards,
Yes.
including America.
right,
Yep.
So, what the rich does is very different from what the regular folks do.
Right.
You know, and it's the way it is.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to
You
give you
know?
an example of what you just said, Bernard. For example, if an average person like yourself or me, or maybe you, Bernard, if throughout their life they had a hardship and they filed for bankruptcy, you are shunned. You are looked down upon as like, you can't control your own finances, and look how horrible you are. You had to go through a bankruptcy.
Right.
If you have money, it's commonplace for businesses to go through bankruptcy, sometimes just to reorganize.
Yep.
And that's looked upon as, oh, well, that's just business.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
you're right, there are double standards, because that is a double standard.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens everywhere. In Malaysia, there is double standards with the government. The elite lives a totally different lifestyle than the regular people. And most of the regular people tend to be suppressed by the elite. Because
Yes.
of that.
How did you
So,
decide to write this book? Who did someone encourage you, or did you just decide on your own?
well, when I first met my now husband, Walter, um, in the beginning, when we met, I had told him briefly that I had a very unusual teenage life.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't give me much notice. He says, yeah, everybody have a,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Not like yours.
so then when I began to started writing the first book, he was very curious to find out more about what exactly happened. He was more curious about my valet, my ex-lover then, Andy, because in the book, he is this perfect person
Ah,
that I
okay.
painted him to be.
And
you
no
know,
one wants to be
and he
compared to a perfect person.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And he wanted to meet Andy, who now lives in Australia. Um, and I said, I don't think it's a very good idea because I don't want to dig up old things, 50 years ago. And what happens if I fall back in love with Andy? What
Yeah.
happens then? So I was very reluctant to have them meet. And at this juncture, they still haven't met yet.
Mhm.
And
But don't you think Andy's moved on
uh,
by now too? He's probably moved way on by now.
well, in the last book, he had a heart failure, but I won't reveal what happened after that because if I do write Life After a Herring Boy Saga, I will have something else to talk about.
Okay.
But he's happily married at that juncture to a Japanese boy. So and they both lived in Australia. He was nursing Andy at an earlier stage when he also had a major surgery. So so Andy is also happily attached.
Good.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with it if Walter meets him, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
anyway, when it comes to writing the book, though, did you decide to just write it on your own? No one encouraged you?
No one encouraged me because I had a shop before the downturn in 2000, around 2007, 2008.
Right.
I closed my shop in Honolulu. I
You
had
were a
boutique
fashion
there.
designer. Yeah.
Yes, I'm a fashion designer. And I decided it would be the perfect time to write to document my experience before I leave this world. So, and the whole series of the books took me 8 years to complete. Each book takes about 18 months
Right.
to
Okay.
write.
That's good.
Yeah.
And who does the
Because
editing?
a lot of editing and a lot of research went into it. Because when you're writing a memoir, besides having old photographs and journals and diaries to remind you of what happened, there are also things that I don't remember in detail of
Right.
that era. So I have to go into that era to see what political things was happening or what social things was happening during that period and incorporate that into my writing. Writing a memoir is very different, in my experience, to writing a fictional
Right.
story.
Where you have to be
Although
more
my memoir,
precise and more accurate.
yeah, and also you have the gist of the conversation. I can't remember who said what at certain times, but I know the gist of the conversation of what transpired. So the creative side of the writing is through the dialogue of the different people. Um, and it also has to run in a chronological order.
Right.
So in fictional things, you can jump from here to there, but
Right.
in a autobiography, everything has to make sense. In other
Right.
words,
Right.
when you're writing.
And I think what you said is important too. You may remember something one day, and then when you get ready to write it, you may remember it a different way. And usually that's because you're allowing the person who was having the conversation, you start recalling more about what they said. And so that helps
Correct.
enlighten you to what really was said. Or in some
Right.
cases, it may be a friend who'll say, no, 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 that's not what happened. Remember? So
Yeah.
you're right. In writing those, there's going to be alterations throughout the whole process. You're going to be changing things around because of as you start to recall things, you remember more than you did when you first started it.
Exactly. And then fresh ideas come up when you're writing, and then maybe you can delete this and put this in. Um, it's the same with writing anything, any novel or books. But the only difference is that um, it has to be as true as possible to what your life experience is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, right, especially if you're saying that it's based on reality. If it's an autobiography, then it's got to be what you recall.
Right.
It can't be a version of what you recall. And even if it's a story that someone told you throughout your life and you're just repeating that story, you want to recall that story as well as you possibly can. You want to give it justice as to how it was told
Right.
to you. There's this old thing where if you tell someone something, then they go tell someone else, and they go tell someone else. By the time it comes back to you, it's a different story.
Yeah. And it would also be like it would be my take on what my story is. If Andy was to write a Herring Boy saga, it would be a different story. It
Right.
would be his story.
It was his recollection of what happened.
Yeah.
Right.
And we all
Exactly.
recall things differently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really my take on what my experience is.
And that's why it took
And
you so long, because you have to really sit down and sort through that thought process and try and figure out what is really what happened and how did it happen. I think one of the key things you mentioned as well was the political climate each time you were writing, because things were different back then, 50 years ago. And
very.
it's very important to understand what that climate was like, because the world is so different today. And to be writing about something that a whole generation, or maybe two generations, really have no idea about, you have to paint that picture for them. And we can't always go by what a newspaper says or what the media says on television. You really do have to do some research and find out what the facts were.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm writing about the period between the mid 60s, like 64 to 70, 1970. So that's the period when the sexual revolution was in place. And all that plays into what I'm writing. because it's all part of my decision to do what I do,
Mm-hmm.
Uh, whereas nowadays, I probably would think differently when I'm doing it, or if whether I would
It's a different
decide.
world, and you would be more
Yeah,
concerned about how people will perceive you. When you're young,
exactly.
like you were when you were inducted into this school, or I guess you could say inducted, they the mind thought was different then. The way we thought about the whole makeup of society. I don't know
Yeah,
how it would today it would be viewed differently. I think today, and I'm not belittling this in any way because I don't see anything wrong because you chose to do this. But today it would fall more into the line of sex trafficking.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and I think that's truly what they would bill it as today, as opposed to 50 years ago. It was just a school. It was something you chose to
exactly.
do,
Right.
because you
Yeah.
were a minor when this all took
Uh,
place.
well, that being said, you also have to think that way back in the, let's say, uh, the early historical period,
Uh-huh.
people marry at 14 years old. Girls get married,
Right. No,
at
I
14.
understand that. I have a friend who got married at 14, and
Yeah.
she and her husband were married until he died
So,
56 years later.
Yeah.
so I mean, it's a whole different world, and you can't use today's standard to judge what the 60s was like.
Right.
You
And
know.
that's what my point is that's why
Yeah.
history
Yeah.
is important in order to be able you can't pass judgment on something unless you understand the situation and circumstances of that time.
Yeah. Right.
Well, we're down
Exactly.
to the last minute
I
of
can't
the
believe
show.
it.
This went so fast.
Wow.
But so Bernard, where can we find your books?
They're on Amazon, and if you Google a Herring Boy Saga, a memoir by Young, um, you should find all the 5 books. The first one is called Initiation. The second book is Unbridled. The third book is Debauchery. Fourth book is Turpitude. And the fifth book is Metanoia.
And you wrote some short stories. They'll be available there as well.
The short stories are basically excerpts from
Okay.
the books.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
we're going to have to end this here real quick. Jan, where can we find your book?
Amazon and
The Secrets of Time.
The Secrets of Time and Aspects of Writing.
Okay. And if you'd like to learn more about our guest, Bernard Foong Young, just go to Aspects. That's a long one. Just go to aspectsofwriting.com. We'll have his picture posted there with his books, and you can just click on those images, and it'll take
Yeah.
you right to them. Again,
Right.
Bernard, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah.
You can find this show will be on YouTube after it airs. Just go to youtube.com/aspects of writing. They take it from there and they put it on Roku TV, Livestream, Tiki. In addition to that,
Thank
we're on
you.
iHeartRadio. We're on iTunes. We're now on Amazon. Roku has a radio show now as well, so we're on Roku Radio. But our main show is syndicated on amfm247.com. That's amfm247.com. So just go there at 1 o'clock on Saturdays, Pacific Standard Time. Well, actually, that's Pacific
Yes.
Standard Time, and you can tune into that show. We're also on 14 terrestrial stations. Just go to aspectsofwriting.com to learn more. Again, thank you so much, Bernard, for being on the show. And until
Thank
next
you
week,
for having me.
you're welcome. Until next week, this is your host, James Kelly, saying, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thanks again, Bernard.
Thanks.
Thank you to you
Great
both.
show.